Well, here's OGP boat, and it's in pretty much the same configuration it was last time I used it, except I have a cover on it because we're getting this thing ready for winter. Just going to get another cover on top of this, a big tarp, but kind of want to go back and discuss that Mercury 200 a little bit, and it's part of a lead into another focus on the channel, and that's building old motors. This was a project I intended to put on video, kind of fix it up, but it turned out it was in good enough condition I didn't have to do anything except for start it up and run it. I had to buy a tank, that's about it. If you look on the inside, we mounted a backup motor up front, my little Tohatsu 5-horse, 4-stroker, and put new tires on it, and have my 20-horse Merc 200 on the back. And I love this thing. It's one of my favorite 2-stroke outboards, and I was lucky enough to acquire one. You can go up there and look inside there. Things look pretty dry, don't they? That's good. Boy, I'd like to take it out today. And this is a 1962 Starcraft aluminum boat. And this is a short shaft because it's got a 15-inch transom. And I was fortunate enough to find a short shaft 20 to put on this thing. When it came up, I bought it in a hurry. Take that off for now, leave it off. That nice Mercury aluminum fitting for the gas on it. What I got a 4406157 serial number. Take the cover off, you sort of push down that, the front faceplate comes off. Let me see if I can lay the camera where I could do that. Got a little bit of water in there. And then you have these. Pop them loose. Camera pick that up. But you pop those latches loose and these little hooks. And there goes your cover. And I just enjoy the simplicity of it and how rugged this darn thing is. So this is what it looks like on the inside. And this one here has got their Thunderbolt electronic ignition. Not my favorite. I like the older ones that have the points, and we're going to find a few of those and put them into the channel. This one here is in reasonably good shape. Permagap spark plugs. I don't know if you've seen those, but they don't have electrodes. It's sort of a dot in the middle. And it's got the newer carburetor with the float bowls underneath it versus on the side. And what we're going to do on this video is, now that you've got introduced to my favorite outboard, we're going to go online and start finding some information about it, and I'm going to fold in a couple of minutes of runtime because I got a fair amount of runtime on this motor this summer. It got a new impeller. You know, you drop the lower unit and there's an impeller housing, you put that on there, and got a pair of plugs and GKs, and I put this transom saver on it, and that was to take a little bit of load off the obviously the transom, and make it ride a little bit nicer down the highway. I didn't like the idea of having aluminum, the thin aluminum sheet metal underneath the boat riding on the rollers. So the combination of making sure it was underneath that brace and the transom saver, I think that's probably going to be a better deal for this motor. And we're going to replace the transom anyway, because even though when you wind that in tight, it makes an impression in the wood, it still wants to walk up and out when it takes this boat up and out of the water, because it does. It puts a fair amount of stress on that mount right there. It actually wants to pull the motor right off. It's hanging the boat on that thing, and it wants to pull the motor right off of there. And I had a situation this summer where when I was done going fast, this side here had lifted about a ½ an inch and scared the living crap out of me. So we may make a permanent mount, you know, punch a hole right through here and mount that motor's so it doesn't want to walk up the back of the transom. But we're not going to do that until we replace the wood. That's going to be a project for the channel. There's your fuel pump right there. See it on the side? And diaphragms are pretty easy to change on those. And this is really the control box for the ignition system. And you have the float bowl and that carburetor underneath in the center instead of on the side like the older ones. And this one actually has a mounting point for an electric start configuration. So you can find these 20 horse motors with electric start. It's really not a bad deal. And if you look underneath, you can see the trigger and the bits and pieces. I may take this thing off and put it inside for the winter, you know. I mean, I really enjoy this motor. I want to give it the best chance possible of survival. Runs beautifully, as you will see. And when you start looking at old outboards, you know, really, these things are pretty rugged. The things you kind of look for, don't worry about whether or not it runs well or not at first. Just make sure it has things like good compression and spark. You know, things like the fuel pump and the carburetor are pretty easy to bring up the snuff. And the other thing is look around the bolts, especially the connection between the aluminum and the bolts. You know, like around there, then around the water jacket cover and stuff like that. And look for white corrosion, because that's a bad sign. If you start seeing white stuff in there between the junctions of the two plates or the junctions of the motor and the housing down there, that's a sign that it was in salt water and probably it has other issues. So see how nice and clean that is? And even around here, this cover, there's no white corrosion beginning to poke its way through. That's the kind of thing you look for on these things if you're going to take them and restore them. And this one here actually is in better condition than I expected. I had bought this with the intention of restoring it, but man, it's so close to being right. I think what I'm going to do is just run it for a while, and I'll pick another one to restore. I'll show you a couple pictures in the garage. I've got a couple of boats that are about ready for that. I mean, this got dinged up and someone put some black paint on it, you know, but really all in all, that motor's in pretty nice shape. Okay. I'm going to put the cover back on, and then I'll walk in the garage and I'll show you the predecessor to this motor. It's pretty cool. This is the predecessor to that Mercury 220 horse motor. And this is another roughly same displacement motor. And things like the handle and the shift technology wasn't much different. But this one has the older style side float carburetor, and you saw a lot of these in the 60s, even in the 50s. Also, the fuel pump is on the side, and actually this one here has got these little buttons in there that kind of are like little valves, and it's pulsed right directly on the crankcase, and that's also a decent design. But a lot of this stuff is very similar. You know, the technology evolved, but it wasn't a big revolution. This one here has a points style ignition that's underneath the flywheel and not electronic. And you know, I actually like these better because it's easier to get them up and going. If the electronic ignition is done, there's a couple $100 if you can find one. But with these old point systems, the points are still around, the condensers are still around, so you can actually get them to run. And this one here actually was a junk pile that came out of the Hudson River, so it had corrosion, and I hammered it all apart and cleaned it up and put some paint on it. And this was done back in 1981. It's been sitting around in my garage ever since. I need to get it running. And what kept me from running it more is I don't have the top cover for it, as you can tell. But I ran it like this, and I had this set up for a kill switch, and I had this also set up, instead of using the handle with a throttle and a cam, is I had the throttle operated with a hand throttle with a cable versus the tiller handle. So this was set up a little bit different. Notice the choke is pretty simple. You know, just a lot of the same kind of technology. Just a very, very simple design. Those things are really, really rugged. I happen to like them, if you hadn't noticed. Now I've got a pair of 110s, and they're also similar. in the way they're constructed. And maybe I'll pull one off just to... These here, the cover's a little bit more sophisticated. You gotta rotate that down. The cover comes completely off. And this one here is the 110. It's a little smaller in displacement. Obviously looks that way because it has a smaller motor. And this one also is a points style ignition. It's an older one, and I like those because it's very, like I said, it's very easy to get these going. But look at the layout. It's pretty much the same. You have the exhaust on this side, the exhaust cover. This one has the older style side float bowl versus the float bowl underneath the carburetor like the new ones have. And it won't take me long to get this going. Look at the fuel pump on this. It's right here. Right here on the carburetor like the 200 one was. And it's also pulsed from the crankcase through this tube which has been disconnected. I've got to go put that back together. So really the project for this one right here, it's got good compression. It's got like 120 per cylinder. But the carburetor had been taken apart and the guy didn't know how to get it back together. You know, I think this will be the first bearing up build like we do on chainsaws. And this one here is a 7.5, and notice that it's got the coils external here. Those are the ignition coils. This one coil here is bad, you can tell. And it too is a freshwater motor. You're not looking at any corrosion around the plates and stuff like that. But it doesn't have spark on this spark plug, that coil. Now this is the electronic ignition that I don't like because they're hard to find, and when you do find them, oftentimes they're not working. And somebody had put some time into this one as well. Again, notice what it's got for a carburetor. It's got the side float carburetor, and here's the fuel pump sitting up there, pulsed by this. This is the line that goes to the crankcase to pulse the fuel pump. And I'm surprised. I've never seen them mounted there, but I guess they did, because that's a lot of tubing for a pulse line. It's a lot of diameter right there. I bet it doesn't pulse well at all. That one there is going to be a project as well for the channel, and I'm not sure how far we're going to go into it. It seems like it has pretty good compression. It seems like its only issue is that one spark plug, but this is that era of electronic ignition that makes me nervous. Even though it's got coils, it's got electronic trigger and a CDI style ignition up in there. And like I said, when they go, they're hard to find and they're pretty pricey. So I'm hoping that the actual brain of the CDI system is okay on this one. It's just the coil itself. I went and bought some coils. These coils go for about 50 bucks. I'm going to get into that a little bit in the channel too, because there's a variety of different coils available. So anyway, cast of characters. I'm rambling. I think before we do speed trials, we better get it going. So this is my new Mercury 200. And I'm going to go put it back on the trailer after a day of sea trials. One thing I can tell you about that motor there is it really honks for a little boat. So while I'm on the subject of Mercuries, there's actually quite an extensive amount of information online if you know how to look for it. So we just looked at that Mercury 200 20 horsepower, and it has a serial number that starts with 440, right? Now, there's a couple of places you can look online for information. One of them is that www.marineengine.com. Okay? Now, this is basically a place, it's not Mercury Marine themselves, but basically they sell both aftermarket and OEM parts for outboards. It's actually a great resource. So when you go to that website, you want to look for engine parts, Mercury outboard parts, and armed with your serial number. Don't bother putting your serial number in there, because more likely than not, you're not going to get what you're looking for. I'll show you. And just go. There's the serial number. And more often than not, it doesn't find it, right? What you want to do first is go to this menu over here where it says shop by year, horsepower, and serial number range. And this is an outboard, 1960 to present. And then they have a list of the horsepowers over here. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting. And you're going to find that there's a fair number of options for the 20 horsepower. Well, that's a carbureted 20 horsepower, and it's a model 200 20 horsepower, so it's going to be one of these 3 entries, actually 4 entries, where you're going to find your information. And then when I clicked on the 200, see that right there? It gave me a serial number range right here. And I happen to fall in between that because it starts with 440, right? So that would be the serial number range that would be interesting to me. And then basically they have a series of menus. Let's just look at ignition stuff. Parts diagram. You know, they've got the stator and all. They got the coils. They got the switch box. See those coils right there? This actually covers several models. And the switch box is a pricey little unit. And if you want to spend $300, this is why I always get nervous about that class of Mercury, because if you don't have a good ignition system, you just spent a lot of money. And this is the kind of thing that you got to know. And you got to know before you get into them. But this is also why I prefer the points style versions of these motors over the CDI, because if the CDI is done, you're done. So let's back out of that and go look at one of the older ones if we can. Conversely, if you get a motor kind of like that white one has the same ignition system you're seeing right here. They had them for a long time. Those parts, believe it or not, are still available. So a coil is, $126 versus $400. And then you're going to want things like points. See what I'm saying? And that's why I prefer the older ones, because they run just as good, but they're affordable to repair. Now let me look at another site. So we looked at the marineengine.com. All right. Here's the actual Mercury Marine website. This is www.mercurymarine.com. Okay. They also have a really, really, really good source of information in the fact they've got catalogs. And launched a parts catalog. A lot of the older motors, they don't keep this stuff online anymore. You have to go download the archived parts catalog, and I suspect this is the same situation. So let's go to Outboard, and it's a 2-stroke carb, right? And then yet again, this one has a list of the horsepower rating. So let's slide down to 20. One of these. Now, see the archive catalogs? And then you have this stuff here. This stuff here is later modeled than mine. I suspect, since the serial number is at 47, I'm probably going to look at this archived catalog right here. So let's do that. Click on that, and then over here you're going to see parts catalog, and it gives you a list of the serial numbers, 353 to 47095. So since mine is 440, obviously this catalog right here, which is archived, is the one I want. And you can download it, and you can pick through it. But let's see what it has. It's a PDF file. And this is the actual Mercury Marine catalog. This is really valuable because it gets you part numbers, but it also gives you part diagrams. Just a lot of good information in these catalogs should you have one of these older Mercuries. And we're going to get down into same diagram you saw before, and you can start looking at the ignition components and the coils and stuff. Oh, went too far. There's your switch box, which is your CDI, and there's your coils. 26. Let's look at 26. There's a coil. And what you want out of something like this is the part number. And look at this. It gives you some information. You got a variety of different coils. It tells you the serial numbers they apply to. They have different part numbers. And all that information is just absolutely gold. So there's a second source of information. And here's another one, oldmercs.com. And this website here used to be, and I think it still is, affiliated with what used to be Grubb Marine in Pennsylvania. And the guy was an absolute enthusiast in old Mercs. So let's see if we can find what they have there. So let's look at Mercury Outboard models. It's going to be the same kind of a deal. Now, I don't know the years, right? We don't know what the years are. So let's take a look. Let's say it's 67 to 69. And see if we got a Merc 200. I don't think that's the right one. It's going to give you some information. 67 to 69, here's the serial numbers. So I think mine is probably quite a bit newer than that, right? Let's try 80 to 2010. And so they have it all broken out all differently. So points on all 1 and 2 cylinder models, 63 to 69 except for 20 horsepower. And then you have this one. But basically you have another source of parts, another source of coils, some of it's aftermarket, but yet another source of really good information.